Welcome. Today's project's all about a very powerful story that directly relates to the anxiety, the depression you're currently going through, or someone you know suffering from anxiety, from depression, somebody who continually manifests the negatives in their life. Now, this story, the Cain and Abel story, it's been around for thousands of years. Now, it's lasted for such a long time, and you may ask yourself, why does a story like that last for such a long time? Why is it still told today? Because if you go on YouTube and you Google Cain and Abel story, there's videos of the story, and there's millions of people viewing the story. And that's amazing. So that has to make you think, why do stories like this last for such a long time? Now, it directly relates to humans. It's the story describes the human condition, what humans are capable of. And for a story to last for such a long time, there's some truth to it. There's deep truths to this story. Now, Cain and Abel, they're the first human beings on the planet in the Old Testament. And before that, Adam and Eve, they're not the first human beings because they were made in the image of God. So Cain is the first human being to be born, essentially, because he's the oldest. So he's the first to be born. And Cain is a tiller of the earth. He's a farmer. And then Abel's born, and he's a herder of sheep. Cain has everything given to him. He was the firstborn. Everything goes his way. He lives this materialistic lifestyle for a while, right? Everything's just given to him. He's the oldest, and usually the oldest is the most dominant of the relatives or the children, right? Usually, and so they tend to favor the oldest sometimes more than the youngest, right? But in this story, what's so interesting about it is that they have to sacrifice their prized, most valued thing to God, right? To the gods. And so Cain, he sacrifices fruit. Abel, he sacrifices his prized, most valuable, juiciest, fattest lamb. And so God favors Abel for this sacrifice, for this lamb, this prized, juicy lamb. And what's so interesting about this story is that Abel, he makes the right sacrifice. That's why God favors Abel. Cain doesn't make the right sacrifice. He just makes a mediocre, half-ass sacrifice, some fruits, and they weren't probably even good fruits, right? They're just like probably the worst fruits he could conjure up, right? And so God doesn't favor Cain, he favors Abel. He makes the right sacrifice. And so the act of essentially letting go of what you value now for the betterment of your future is the idea behind this story. So Abel sacrifices something of value now so that his future could be better. And a lot of people today don't make the right sacrifices for their future self. So that's the idea of Cain and Abel. If you sacrifice something now, it can be paid off in the future. And that was my old self. My old self would not sacrifice the destructive habits that were consuming him. I was so engulfed in the destructive habits of negative friends, the destructive habits of reassurance seeking, being dependent on other people, staying in a job I didn't like, staying in a relationship I didn't like. I was continually running the same destructive habits over and over and over again. And that's what we can learn from this story. Cain, instead of coming to the realization that he didn't make a sacrifice of great value, instead of coming to the realization that he's insufficient, that he could do better, what does he do? He starts to brood. He starts to ruminate over how great Abel is. He starts to fall into the pit of envy, resentfulness, and he starts to entertain those thoughts. And he starts to entertain them day after day after day. Instead of coming to the consciousness of instead of consciously being aware of his insufficiencies, instead of consciously being aware that, oh man, I'm not doing the right things. I'm continuously engaging in destructive habits that make my life bad, that make my life worse, right? And that's really important to understand about this story. If he just realized that what he's doing every day is really sending him down a bad path, he could change his path. He could maybe look at Abel and say, you know what? I could start doing what he's doing. I could start to emulate his actions. I can start to use Abel as this ideal, something to strive towards. I can use it as a goal, use him as a goal. But he doesn't. Instead, he continues down this bad path. And I see it all the time with my past negative friends, with clients. They continue to engage in bad habits every day. And I always tell them, what are you doing different today that's serving your higher self? Because if you change your habits, you change your behaviors, you set a proper aim, things in your life will become better. And that's what Abel's doing. He's making the proper sacrifices. And so his life is becoming better and better. But Cain, he's brooding. He doesn't get to that conscious awakening that he is insufficient. And that's what happened in my anxiety recovery, is I had to come to the realization that I'm doing the wrong things. All of my insecurities and fears started to bubble up in my recovery, and I was shook by it. I was disturbed by it. But I was determined to get to a better place in my life. And that's what happened in my recovery. I started to do things differently every day. I started to change old negative habits, and things in my life started to become better. That's what happens when you just come to that consciousness, that awakening. You're like, oh, I could just do things better every day. I can change these negative habits that I'm doing, and my life will become better. I can overcome this anxiety that I'm currently going through. So I sacrificed so many things. I sacrificed, hot showers for cold ones, because the cold showers helped my future self. I felt better. I felt more awake. It helped my immune system. And so I discovered that there's multiple Brads across time. That's what Abel understands, that there's multiple Abels across time. There's an Abel an hour from now. There's an Abel a day from now. There's an Abel a week from now. It's like when you go out drinking, you understand that the next few drinks may lead to a horrible hangover the next day. That's the future you, right? And so I was making the proper sacrifices in my life to serve the future Brad. So I engaged in a morning routine instead of sleeping in, right? I sacrificed sleeping in. I sacrificed getting up later to get up early, to have a morning routine to prepare the future Brad for the day. I sacrificed negative friends so that the future Brad could have those proper role models to help me get to that ideal. I sacrificed TV for exercise. I sacrificed, video games for reading. I sacrificed junk foods for a strict diet so that my future self could wake up in the mornings and feel energized because I'm eating the right food. So I'm always sacrificing the impulsiveness of the now for the future Brad to feel good. The future Brad is the person that's feeling good, mentally well, physically well, right? So what are you sacrificing now? Are you engaging in impulsive behaviors? Are you dependent on other people for reassurance? Are you Googling your symptoms? Or are you making the proper sacrifices and dropping those bad habits for the future you? And that's essentially what the story's about. But it's not over yet, right? So instead of Cain recognizing his ideal, recognizing his insufficiencies, what happens? He starts to spiral down into the shadow, right? As Carl Jung says, we have a shadow. The deepest, darkest parts of us stem down to hell. And he's spiraling down into hell. And so he's ruminating and brooding. And what happens? Cain kills Abel. He kills him. He kills the only ideal in his life. That's so interesting. It's so interesting because when Cain kills his ideal, he has to live with the punishment, right? Because at one point in the story, Cain's like, this punishment is too great for me to bear. I can't bear this. And that's what happens with people with PTSD, right? They do something that they just can't believe they did, right? Like a person going to war and getting into a firefight, or a person betraying somebody. If you betray somebody or if you cheat on somebody, right? You just can't believe you did it, and people tend to go into PTSD because they just can't understand what they did. And you can see this in one of my favorite books of all time, Crime and Punishment. In Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov, he kills an old lady, and then he goes and suffers the consequences of it. He's suffering from PTSD, can't comprehend the actions that he did. He thought they were morally just, but he did it, and he just sunk into this deep hell. And so God doesn't punish Cain. What happens? God says you have to live with what you did. That's the worst punishment. So in the end, this is the first story of human beings, right? And it's so amazing because it describes what human beings are capable of. If you entertain and continue down the bad path, bad things are just going to happen to you. You're going to go to a deeper, darker place. But if you make the right sacrifices, if you start to realize, your insufficiencies, you start to come to the realization that, you're doing the wrong things every day. That's leading you to negative things in your life. I see it all the time. People are unconsciously manifesting the wrong relationships. They're constantly manifesting the wrong things. They always say that, why do all these negative things happen to me all the time? But if they made the right sacrifices, if they started to shift who they were and set an aim, an ideal, things could get better for them, right? And that's where I'm going to leave you on today's video. Sit with yourself and figure out, what are you doing daily that's really harming your current self, and what can you do to reach that ideal person? And so make sure you're making the right sacrifices, because when you make the right sacrifices, things in your life will be better. Thank you for tuning into today's video. And lastly, remember, do not let your anxiety define who you are. I will see you on the next video. Bye for now. Remember to hit that subscribe button and that bell so that whenever a new video of mine appears, you will be the first to know. Namaste.